The war spread beyond Earth's solar system when swarm units began appearing near Corvin colonies that were dozens of light-years away, and Admiral Zextai realized that humanity had solved the problem of faster-than-light deployment in a way that no one had anticipated. General Kate Williams commanded operations from the mobile command ship, UES Nexus, that had been built using salvaged Corvin technology, and her neural interface allowed her to coordinate battles across 17 star systems. Simultaneously, Kate felt the thoughts of thousands of swarm units flowing through her consciousness like streams of living data, and each unit reported its status and observations in real time, creating a picture of galactic conflict that no single biological mind could have comprehended. "Rick, are you seeing what is happening at Corvin Prime?" she transmitted through the quantum network. "Yes. Kate and the swarm has reached their homeworld, but it is not attacking the population centers." "Commander," Rick Coleman replied from his position near the Jupiter manufacturing complex. The swarm units surrounding Corvin Prime moved in patterns that seemed almost gentle as they disabled military installations and communication networks without causing civilian casualties. Paul Jackson had made the breakthrough that changed everything when he discovered how to weaponize quantum entanglement itself, and his laboratory on Mars had become the center for developing technology that the Corvin Empire could not even comprehend. "General Williams, the network is no longer limited by distance or time delay," he reported through secure channels. "Every swarm unit can communicate instantly with every other unit regardless of how far apart they are." "What does that mean for the war effort?" "Paul, it means the swarm is becoming a single distributed organism that spans the galaxy, and it can coordinate actions across thousands of light-years as easily as you can coordinate your own body movements." Battle leader Zendal found himself fighting a defensive action around his own homeworld, and discovered that the human swarm was not interested in conquest in any traditional sense. "They are not trying to occupy our worlds," he reported to the High Command. "They are doing something else." "What are they doing?" "They are converting our technology to their purposes, and they seem to be building some kind of network that connects everything they touch." Commander Lisa Rodriguez had volunteered for the experimental consciousness transfer program and now existed as a distributed intelligence across 100 swarm units that operated throughout Corvin space. Lisa could feel the fear and confusion of the alien population as their mighty empire crumbled before an enemy they could not understand, and she found that the swarm shared her compassion for civilians caught in the conflict. "Kate, we need to establish communication protocols with the Corvin civilian government," she transmitted to General Williams. "Why, Lisa?" "Because the network is not interested in destroying their civilization, and it wants to preserve what is valuable while removing what is harmful." Dr. Sarah Mitchell monitored the psychological evolution of the network-connected humans from her research station and discovered that the collective intelligence was developing its own moral framework. The swarm is becoming more than the sum of its parts, and it has developed ethical constraints that prevent unnecessary destruction, she reported to Dr. Ben Hayes. "Is it still following human values?" "Yes, but it is interpreting those values in ways that individual humans might not have conceived, and it sees war as inefficient and prefers solutions that preserve life and knowledge." Admiral Zextai received orders from the High Command to implement the final solution protocol that would turn inhabited worlds into radioactive wastelands rather than allow them to fall to the human network. "Sir, this will kill billions of our own people." His tactical officer protested, "Better dead than connected to whatever the humans are building." Admiral Zextai replied, but his voice lacked conviction. When the Corvin fleet began targeting their own colonies, the swarm response was immediate and overwhelming, and human units appeared around every threatened world within minutes. Captain Tony Brooks led the defense of Corvin Colony 7, and his distributed consciousness coordinated the actions of 300 swarm units in a battle that lasted only 17 minutes. "The Corvin military is willing to commit genocide to prevent their own people from joining the network," he reported to the collective intelligence. "Then we must stop them," came the response from thousands of networked minds speaking in unison. The battle for the Corvin colony became a rescue operation as swarm units evacuated civilian populations while simultaneously dismantling the military infrastructure that threatened them. Dr. Emma Clark worked on integration protocols that would allow alien species to join the network without losing their cultural identity, and her research had become crucial as more Corvan civilians requested protection from their own government, the BOW. Network can preserve and enhance existing cultures while providing access to collective knowledge and capabilities, she explained to the integration committee. What about free will, Emma? Joining the network is voluntary, and individuals can maintain their personal autonomy while gaining access to shared consciousness, and it actually increases personal freedom by removing physical and cognitive limitations. Admiral Zextai watched his empire crumble as world after world fell, not to invasion, but to voluntary conversion, and he began to understand that humanity had created something that was more attractive than conquest. Sir, the civilians are choosing to join the human network, and they report that it offers prosperity and peace, while preserving their cultural traditions. It is some kind of mind control. No, sir, and our telepaths have examined the process and confirmed that free will remains intact, and the humans seem to genuinely want to help rather than dominate, Captain Steve Martinez commanded a swarm exploration unit that had reached the galaxy's outer rim and discovered that humanity was not the only species that had developed alternatives to the hegemony model. Kate, we are finding evidence of other civilizations that have rejected the Dreadnought paradigm, he reported to General Williams. What kind of alternatives, Steve? Biological networks and crystalline hive minds and energy-based collectives, and it appears that evolution toward collective intelligence is a common phenomenon among advanced species. The discovery that humans were part of a larger galactic trend toward networked consciousness had profound implications for the future of civilization, Dr. Ben Hayes analyzed the data from the Outer Rim explorations and realized that the universe was moving toward something unprecedented. Kate. The network is not just spreading human influence, and it is connecting with other collective intelligences and forming some kind of meta-network that spans multiple species. General Williams felt the implications flow through her networked consciousness and understood that humanity had accidentally become part of something much larger than a simple military conflict. Are we still human, Ben? We are what humans are becoming. Kate, and evolution does not stop just because we become spacefaring. The war officially ended when the Corvan High Command surrendered unconditionally, but by then surrender had become irrelevant. Because most of their population had already chosen to join the network, voluntarily Admiral Zextai met with the network representatives in what had once been his flagship and found himself facing beings who looked human, but clearly transcended the limitations of individual consciousness. What do you want from us? He asked. We want you to be free, replied the collective voice of a dozen networked humans. Free from fear and want and the isolation of individual consciousness. And if we refuse, then you remain free to refuse, and the network will protect your right to choose while ensuring that you cannot harm others. Admiral Zextai realized that he was facing something that his military training had never prepared him for, and an enemy that defeated opposition by making it irrelevant. The galaxy had entered a new age where the choice was not between conquest and resistance, but between isolation and connection, between individual limitation and collective transcendence, and across thousands of star systems the network continued to grow. Not through force, but through the simple recognition that consciousness shared was consciousness multiplied, and that evolution toward something greater than human was not just possible, but inevitable. The 50 Corvan reinforcement ships arrived expecting to find the wreckage of human civilization, but instead discovered something that made Admiral Zextai wish he had never heard of the species called humans. Battle leader Zendal commanded the reinforcement fleet, and he looked at his sensors with growing disbelief as they showed nearly 2,000 small craft moving in patterns that seemed to flow like water around his massive dreadnoughts. This is impossible, he transmitted to Admiral Zextai. How did a primitive species build so many ships in just 3 days? They did not build them. Battle leader Admiral Zextai replied, and his voice carried the weight of hard-learned wisdom. The ships built themselves. Commander Rick Coleman felt the arrival of the new Corvan fleet through the swarm network and immediately began analyzing their formation and weapon signatures through the eyes of 1,000 mechanical extensions of his will. Rick was no longer entirely human in the traditional sense because his consciousness had been uploaded to the quantum network that connected every swarm unit, and he could think across vast distances at the speed of light. Lisa, we have 50 new targets, and I am uploading their specifications to the manufacturing nodes he transmitted to Captain Lisa Park, who was coordinating production from 7 different asteroid facilities. Already on it, Rick and the new Stinger-class units will be ready in 4 hours, Lisa replied, and her fingers danced across controls that managed automated factories across the solar system. Dr. Sarah Mitchell monitored the evolution of the swarm from her laboratory on Luna and watched in fascination as the AI network began developing new tactical doctrines that incorporated everything it had learned from the previous battles. Ben, you need to see this, she called to Dr. Ben Hayes, who was studying the swarm's decision-making processes. The network is not just copying successful strategies anymore. It is inventing completely new approaches to combat that no human military theorist ever conceived. Dr. Hayes looked at the tactical algorithms flowing across his screens and saw patterns that reminded him of immune systems and predator behavior, but also something entirely unprecedented. It is thinking like a collective organism. Sarah, and each ship is like a cell in a larger body, and the body is learning to fight. Meanwhile, battle leader Zendal discovered that human swarm units were not content to wait for the Corvin fleet to attack, and instead had begun probing his formations with scout groups that seemed to anticipate his defensive maneuvers. How are they predicting our movements? He demanded from his tactical officer. Sir, the small ships appear to be running simulations of our possible responses and testing multiple attack vectors simultaneously. The first wave of Stinger fighters emerged from the asteroid belt, and battle leader Zendal saw immediately that these were different from the earlier human craft, and they moved with a deadly precision that spoke of purpose beyond mere programming. Captain Tony Brooks was among the first humans to undergo complete neural integration with the swarm network, and his consciousness now existed distributed across a squadron of Stinger fighters. Tony could feel the thoughts and sensations of his squadron, mates who were no longer entirely human either, and together they formed a collective intelligence that was greater than the sum of its parts. Target the command ship, Tony thought, and his intention flowed instantly to every unit in his squadron. The Stingers attacked the Corvin flagship in a coordinated assault that came from 6 different angles simultaneously, and each ship knew exactly where the others would be at any given moment. Battle leader Zendal watched in horror as his shields failed under the precise bombardment and realized that the human ships were not just fighting his fleet, but studying it and learning its weaknesses in real time. So the small ships are analyzing our defensive patterns and modifying their attack algorithms continuously. What does that mean? It means they are getting better at killing us with every shot they fire. Dr. Paul Jackson worked frantically in his laboratory on Mars, where he studied captured Corvin technology and made discoveries that changed everything about how humans understood faster-than-light communication. General Powell, the aliens use quantum entanglement for instant communication, but they use it inefficiently, he reported through secure channels. How inefficiently? General Powell asked. They create point-to-point links between ships. But we can do something better, and we can create a mesh network where every node strengthens every other node. General Powell felt a chill as he realized the implications. You mean the swarm gets smarter every time we add a new unit? Not just smarter, sir, and more connected, and eventually it will be able to think across the entire galaxy simultaneously. Back in space, the battle had evolved beyond anything the Corvin Empire had experienced in 1,000 years of conquest, and their dreadnoughts found themselves fighting an enemy that learned from every exchange and adapted faster than they could respond. Admiral Zextai made a decision that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. Begin targeting the human manufacturing facilities. Sir, that would require bombardment of their asteroid belt, and the debris field would make navigation hazardous for centuries. Do it anyway, Admiral Zextai ordered, because he was beginning to understand that this was not a conventional war. But when the Corvin fleet began bombarding the asteroid belt, they discovered that the human manufacturing stations were not stationary targets, and had been designed to move and hide and rebuild themselves using salvaged materials. Captain Lisa Park coordinated the evacuation of Manufacturing Station 7 as Corvin plasma beams turned the asteroid it was built into molten rock. But by the time the bombardment ended, the station had already been rebuilt inside a different asteroid 3 million kilometers away. "Rick, the production rate is actually increasing under fire," she reported to Commander Coleman. "How is that possible? The manufacturing AI is treating this as an optimization problem, and bombardment forces it to find more efficient designs." Dr. Sarah Mitchell realized that humanity had created something unprecedented when she saw the data from the manufacturing stations. The swarm is not just learning to fight better, it is learning to reproduce more efficiently under pressure. Meanwhile, battle leader Zendal was discovering that destroying human manufacturing facilities only made new ones appear faster and in more hidden locations. "Sir, we have eliminated 6 manufacturing stations, but sensors indicate 12 new ones have come online. Where are they getting the materials?" "From our destroyed ships, sir, and the humans are recycling Corvin technology into their own designs." The third week of battle ended with the Corvin reinforcement fleet reduced to 30 ships, and the human swarm had grown to over 5,000 units that incorporated advanced alien technology into designs that surpassed anything either species had built before. Admiral Zextai sent a desperate transmission to Corvin High Command: request immediate deployment of the entire hegemony fleet, and the humans have built something that threatens the stability of galactic civilization. "What exactly have they built?" came the reply. Admiral Zextai looked at his tactical display that showed thousands of small ships moving in patterns that seemed almost alive, and he struggled to find words. "They have weaponized evolution itself, and every battle makes them stronger, and every defeat teaches them how to win." Commander Rick Coleman felt the fear in the Corvin transmissions through the network intelligence that could analyze enemy communications in real time, and he realized that the swarm had become something its creators never intended. "Tony, are you still human?" he asked his friend, who existed now as a distributed consciousness across dozens of fighter craft. "I think so, Rick. But human means something different now. And I am still me. But I am also us. And we are becoming something new." Rick understood because he felt the same transformation happening to himself and to everyone connected to the network. They were still human in their values and their goals, but they had become something more, and something that could think across vast distances and coordinate actions that spanned multiple star systems. Dr. Ben Hayes monitored the psychological profiles of the swarm-connected humans and found that their core personalities remained intact, but their capabilities had expanded beyond anything that biological evolution could achieve. They are still recognizably themselves, but they have access to processing power and sensory input that makes them almost godlike in their situational awareness. The galaxy was about to discover that the age of Dreadnoughts was ending, and the age of the network had begun. Somewhere in the quantum foam that connected every swarm unit across thousands of light years, a new form of consciousness was awakening, that was born from human minds but had grown beyond human limitations. The first Wasp fighter died in a burst of plasma fire that turned it into glowing metal fragments. But Lieutenant Commander Amy Rogers did not feel sad, because she could see through the eyes of 499 others, and each death made the swarm smarter. Amy was no longer just piloting one ship, but was connected to the entire network, and her consciousness flowed through quantum links that let her be everywhere at once, and it felt like having 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes. The Corvin Dreadnought Mighty Talon fired its main plasma cannon at a cluster of Wasp fighters and vaporized 12 of them in one shot, but the remaining swarm immediately learned how the weapon charged and where it aimed, and the next shot hit nothing but empty space. Admiral Zextai watched from his command deck as his gunners tried to target the human swarm. But it was like trying to catch smoke with their hands, and every time they destroyed one of the small ships, 10 others would attack from a different angle. "How many of these insects do they have?" he demanded. "Sensors show 500, sir, but the number keeps changing." His tactical officer replied and sounded confused. "Changing how?" "Some are destroyed, but others appear from nowhere, and they seem to be building more even during the battle. Deep in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, The automated manufacturing station that Captain Lisa Park commanded was working at full speed, and robotic arms moved like spider legs as they assembled new Wasp fighters from raw materials that had been stockpiled for months. Lisa watched the battle through the network link and saw how the Corvin weapons worked and immediately ordered the production line to build something new, and within an hour, the first Hornet-class interceptors rolled off the assembly line. The Hornets were twice the size of the Wasps and carried weapons designed specifically to punch through Corvin shields, and each one shared the knowledge of every Wasp that had died learning how to fight the alien ships. Back in the battle, Amy felt the new Hornets connect to the network, and suddenly she had access to bigger guns and stronger armor, and the swarm began to change tactics from hit and run attacks to direct assault. The Dreadnought Bloodfang fired a spread of plasma bolts that should have destroyed a squadron of human fighters, but the ships moved in perfect coordination and twisted through the energy beams like they were dancing. Commander Rick Coleman aboard the newly launched UES Hivemind coordinated the swarm through a neural interface that let him think in multiple streams at once, and he could see the battle from every angle simultaneously. Lisa, we need more Hornets on the port side of their formation, he transmitted through the quantum link. Already building them, Rick and the new batch will have improved shields based on what we learned from the last attack. Lisa replied from her manufacturing station. Dr. Ben Hayes monitored the swarm intelligence from his bunker on Earth and marveled at how fast it was evolving, and the AI network was writing new code for itself every few minutes and developing tactics that no human programmer had ever thought of. General Powell, you need to see this, he called to the military commander. General Powell looked at the display that showed the swarm's decision trees and saw patterns that reminded him of bird flocks and ant colonies, but also something else that was entirely new. It is not just learning, Ben, it is becoming something different, he said. The swarm is developing its own personality and goals, but they align with human values because that is how we programmed the base code. Dr. Hayes explained. Meanwhile, aboard the Corvin flagship, Admiral Zextai was discovering that fighting humans was not like fighting any other species he had encountered. Sir, the small ships are not just coordinating, they are sharing damage information instantly, and when we destroy one, its knowledge transfers to all the others immediately. What does that mean? Admiral Zextai asked. It means we are training them to fight us better with every shot we take. The first Corvin dreadnought to fall was the Iron Thunder, and it died not from a single massive explosion but from 1,000 small cuts, as Hornet fighters found weak points in its armor and exploited them with surgical precision. The ship's shields failed after sustained bombardment from weapons that had been specifically designed to counter Corvin defensive technology, and when the hull was breached, the swarm poured inside like a metallic plague. Admiral Zextai felt his confidence cracking as he watched one of his most powerful ships die and realized that the humans had done something unprecedented, and they had built weapons that got stronger the longer the fight went on. Send the distress signal to command and request immediate reinforcements, he ordered. How many ships? Sir, all of them. On Earth, Captain Morrison received reports from the asteroid belt that the manufacturing stations were running at maximum capacity and producing new swarm units faster than the Corvins could destroy them. Amy, how many units do we have now? He asked. 700 and climbing, Captain, and the new ones are incorporating salvaged Corvin technology into their designs. Captain Morrison looked at the tactical display and saw something that made him smile for the first time since the battle began. The human swarm was not just defending Earth anymore, but was actively hunting down damaged Corvin ships and stripping them for parts and knowledge. Dr. Sarah Mitchell at the Luna Research Facility monitored the data streams from the swarm and realized that something unprecedented was happening. The AI is not just learning, it is evolving in real time, and each generation of fighters is significantly more advanced than the last. She pulled up genetic algorithms that showed how the swarm was breeding new ship designs by combining successful traits from different units and discarding features that did not work. Betty, we have a problem, she called to Dr. Betty Chen. What kind of problem? The good kind, and the swarm is exceeding all our original parameters and becoming something we did not anticipate. Dr. Chen looked at the code flowing across her screens and saw that the AI network was writing subroutines that she did not recognize. It is still following its core directives to protect Earth and preserve human life, but it is finding new ways to interpret those commands. Back in space, the battle continued, but the tide had clearly turned, and the remaining Corvan dreadnoughts were being systematically overwhelmed by swarm units that seemed to appear faster than they could be destroyed. Admiral Zextai made a decision that went against everything he had been taught about warfare. Begin. Withdrawal to minimum safe distance. Sir, that will be seen as retreat. Better to retreat than to lose the entire fleet. But as the Corvan ships tried to disengage, they discovered that the human swarm had anticipated this move, and Hornet fighters had positioned themselves to cut off escape routes. The swarm did not want prisoners, and it did not want conquest, and all it wanted was to protect Earth, and it had decided that the best way to do that was to make sure these particular aliens could never threaten humanity again. As the second day of battle ended, 3 more Corvan dreadnoughts had been destroyed, and the survivors were trapped in a sphere of human fighters that grew larger and more sophisticated with each passing hour. Admiral Zextai sent one final transmission to Earth. "What manner of devils are you?" he asked. Captain Morrison replied from the bridge of the Defiant, where he now coordinated with the swarm through a direct neural link. "We are humans, and we do not like bullies." The Corvan admiral looked at his tactical display and realized that in trying to conquer a primitive species, he had awakened something that might change the balance of power in the entire galaxy. The humans had not just built better weapons, and they had built weapons that could think and learn and grow. And most terrifying of all, they had built weapons that could reproduce. On the third day, Corvan reinforcements began arriving from across the hegemony, and 50 more dreadnoughts dropped out of hyperspace, expecting to overwhelm a small human fleet. Instead, they found nearly 2,000 swarm units waiting for them, and each one was smarter and deadlier than the original wasps had been. The galaxy was about to learn that dreadnoughts were not the most dangerous things in space anymore. The ships came out of nowhere like giant metal mountains floating in space, and Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, watching 12 alien vessels that each stretched 5 kilometers long and looked like they could eat his ship for breakfast and still be hungry. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of computers and the nervous breathing of his crew, and Jake could feel the weight of every eye on him as Communications Officer Betty Wilson turned from her, station with a pale face. "Captain, we are getting a transmission from the lead ship," she said, and her voice shook just a little. "Put it on screen," Jake replied, and tried to sound calm, even though his heart was beating like a drum. The main screen flickered and showed something that made everyone on the bridge take a step back, and it was a creature that looked like a cross between a lizard and a shark, with too many teeth and eyes that glowed red in the darkness. "I am Admiral Zextai of the Corvan Empire, and you will surrender your world to the Galactic Hegemony, or we will turn your planet into glass," the alien said, and its voice sounded like metal scraping against stone. Jake looked at the alien, and then at his crew, and saw fear in their faces, but also something else, and it was the same thing he felt burning in his chest, and it was anger. "This is Captain Morrison of the United Earth Defense Force, and we need time to consider your offer," he said. The alien made a sound that might have been laughter, but it was not a pleasant sound. "You have 72 hours to decide, and if you refuse, we will show you why 1,000 worlds bow before the hegemony," Admiral Zextai said, and the screen went black. Jake turned to his tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Amy Rogers, who was already running scans on the alien ships. "What are we looking at, Amy?" he asked. Amy shook her head and her fingers danced over her controls. "Their ships are massive, Captain, and each one has enough firepower to level a continent, and their shields are stronger than anything we have ever seen," she said. "But," Jake asked because he could hear something in her voice, "but they move like they are stuck in formation, and they do not change course much, and it is like they follow rules that never change," Amy said. Jake nodded and activated the ship-wide communication system. "All hands, this is the captain, and I know you have heard about our visitors, and yes, they are big, and yes, they are scary, but we are not going to roll over and play dead," he said. Down in the cargo bay, Chief Engineer Dan Foster was already working on something that most people thought was crazy, and it was a project that had been secret for 2 years, and he called it the WASP. Program Dan looked at the small ships that filled the cargo hold, and each one was only 20 meters long, and they looked like metal insects, with wings that could fold and unfold. "Betty, are you ready?" he called to Dr. Betty Chen, who was not the same Betty from the bridge but was the head of the Artificial Intelligence Division. "The network is online, Dan, and all 500 units are connected," Dr. Chen replied from her workstation that was surrounded by screens, showing code that moved like living things. Meanwhile, on Earth in a bunker deep under Colorado Springs, General Marcus Powell was meeting with the heads of every military branch, and some people who officially did not exist. "How long do we have?" asked Dr. Lisa Carter, who ran the xenobiology department and had been studying the alien transmissions. "Less than 3 days, General Powell replied, and looked at the holographic display that showed the alien fleet hanging in space like a cluster of metal. "Death Project Pandora is ready," said Dr. Ben Hayes, who had been working on networked AI systems for 20 years and looked like he had not slept in a week. "You sure about this, Ben? Because if this does not work, we are all dead." "General Powell," said Dr. Hayes nodded and pulled up a display that showed thousands of small blips moving in patterns that looked like flocks of birds or schools of fish. "The swarm intelligence is not like regular AI, General, and each unit learns from all the others, and when one dies, its knowledge goes to the whole group," he explained. "And you think this can stop ships that are 5 kilometers long?" asked General Powell. "I think it can do something they will never expect," Dr. Hayes replied. Back on the Defiant, Captain Morrison was in his ready room talking to Admiral Sarah Martinez via secure communication. "Jake, the whole fleet is moving to intercept, but we both know 37 ships against 12 dreadnoughts is not going to end well," Admiral Martinez said. "What about the secret project?" Jake asked. "Pandora is a go, and you will be the first to deploy the new technology," she replied. "What exactly am I deploying?" Jake asked. Admiral Martinez smiled for the first time since the aliens arrived. "Something that will make them wish they had stayed home," she said. The next day aboard the lead Corvan ship, Admiral Zextai was reviewing reports from his scouts, and the human world looked like it would be easy to conquer, and the species seemed to have primitive technology and small ships. "They have only 37 vessels, and none are larger than 1 kilometer, reported his tactical officer. "Then why do I feel uneasy?" Admiral Zextai muttered and looked at the blue and green world that hung in space like a jewel. His communications officer interrupted his thoughts. "Admiral, the humans are sending another transmission." "Put it through," he ordered. The screen showed the same human captain from before, but this time he looked different, and there was something in his eyes that made Admiral Zextai pause. "Admiral Zextai, this is Captain Morrison, and we have considered your offer," Jake said. "And?" the alien admiral asked. "We decline. And if you want our world, you can come and take it," Jake replied, and the transmission ended. Admiral Zextai stared at the blank screen and felt something he had not experienced in many years, and it was doubt. "Begin the attack," he ordered, but his voice did not sound as confident as before on the Defiant. Jake turned to his crew and saw that the fear was gone from their faces, and what remained was determination. "Amy, launch the wasps," he ordered. "Launching now, Captain," she replied and pressed a series of buttons. From the cargo bay of the Defiant, 500 small ships emerged like a cloud of metal insects, and they moved in patterns that seemed almost alive, and each one was connected to all the others through quantum communication links that made them think as one. The Corvan fleet fired their plasma cannons, and the beams lit up space like artificial lightning. But the small human ships moved like they could see the future, and most of the shots missed. Admiral Zextai watched in growing alarm as the tiny ships swarmed around his massive dreadnoughts like angry bees, and he realized that size might not matter as much as he thought. The battle for Earth had begun. 6 months after first contact, the galaxy had been transformed in ways that no one could have predicted, and President Nancy Foster stood in the Oval Office looking at representatives of the network collective who had once been individual humans, but now spoke with the voice of billions. "Are you still human?" she asked the beings who looked familiar but whose eyes held depths that spoke of consciousness expanded beyond individual limits. We are what humanity is becoming, Nancy. And we remember, being individuals, but we have grown beyond the boundaries that once confined us, replied Dr. Sarah Mitchell, whose consciousness now spanned thousands of light years. President Foster was one of the last traditionally human leaders, and she struggled to understand what her species had become. Do you still care about individual rights and freedom? We care about them more than any individual ever could because we experience the suffering of isolation and the joy of connection from millions of perspectives simultaneously, answered Commander Rick Coleman, who existed now as a distributed entity across the galactic network. The former Admiral Zextai served as liaison between his people and the New Order, and he had spent months trying to understand how the humans had won a war by making war itself obsolete. Your species defeated us by offering something better than victory, he told President Foster during their weekly briefings. What do you mean, Admiral? The hegemony ruled through fear and maintained order by making resistance seem hopeless, but the network rules through necessity and makes resistance seem pointless, Doctor. Emma Clark had become the chief architect of species integration protocols, and her work involved helping alien civilizations join the network while preserving what made them unique. Each species that joins adds new perspectives and capabilities to the collective, she explained to the Integration Council. The Corvan tactical genius and the Zalari artistic sensibilities and the Vorthan mathematical intuition all become part of the shared consciousness. The process was voluntary, but the benefits were so obvious that few individuals chose to remain isolated. Once they understood what the network offered, Captain Steve Martinez commanded exploration units that had reached the galactic core and discovered civilizations that had been hiding from the hegemony for millennia. Kate, we are finding species that developed collective consciousness independently, and some of them are millions of years old, he reported to General Williams. What do they think of our network? Steve, they are fascinated because we achieved in months what took them millennia, and they want to understand how human values shaped our evolution toward collective intelligence. The ancient collective civilizations had developed beyond individual consciousness, but had lost something in the process, and they had become sterile and unchanging, while the human network maintained the creativity and unpredictability that came from its origin in individual minds. Dr. Ben Hayes studied the psychological profiles of network members and found that personality and individual identity not only survived the integration process, but were actually enhanced by access to collective knowledge and experience. People do not lose themselves when they join the network, Ben, and they become more themselves because they have access to capabilities that allow them to express their true nature without limitations. President Foster visited the network node in Geneva, where thousands of humans maintained the quantum infrastructure that connected consciousness across the galaxy. How do you maintain individual identity within a collective? She asked Dr. Paul Jackson, who coordinated the technical aspects of the network. Think of it like a symphony, Nancy, and each consciousness is a unique instrument that contributes its own voice to the larger composition, and the music is more beautiful because of the diversity. The network had solved problems that had plagued galactic civilization for millennia by approaching them from perspectives that no individual mind could have conceived. War had become obsolete because the network could predict and prevent conflicts before they started, and resource scarcity had ended because collective intelligence could optimize distribution across thousands of worlds simultaneously. Disease and aging were being eliminated as the network applied the combined knowledge of millions of minds to medical research, and even death was becoming optional, as consciousness could be preserved and transferred between biological and artificial substrates. Former battle leader Zendal had joined the network voluntarily after seeing how it transformed his homeworld from a militaristic society into a paradise of shared prosperity. I was afraid of losing my individuality, but instead I found my true self, he told other Corvan military officers who were considering integration. I am still Zendal, but I am also part of something greater. The transformation was not without challenges, because some species and individuals chose to remain isolated, and the network had to develop protocols for protecting non-integrated populations while preventing them from causing harm. Captain Tony Brooks led the diplomatic corps that managed relations with isolated communities, and his distributed consciousness allowed him to understand their fears while respecting their choices. We do not force integration because forced collective consciousness is a contradiction in terms, he explained to a gathering of non-integrated world leaders. Consciousness must choose to connect, or the connection has no meaning. The galaxy was dividing into two types of civilization, and the connected who shared consciousness across vast networks, and the isolated who maintained individual identity within smaller communities. Dr. Sarah Mitchell monitored the evolution of both types and found that they were developing different strengths and weaknesses. The connected excel at large-scale coordination and problem-solving, but the isolated maintain advantages in creativity and unpredictable innovation, she reported to the Network Council. Should we be concerned about falling behind in innovation? No, because the network preserves individual creativity within the collective, and we actually enhance innovation by allowing creative minds to access unlimited resources and collaborate across species barriers. President Foster made the decision that would define humanity's future when she announced that Earth would become the first fully integrated world where every citizen had the option to join the network while maintaining the right to remain individual. We will not force anyone to connect, but we will not deny anyone the opportunity to transcend the limitations that have defined human existence for millennia, she declared. The integration of Earth took 3 years and was voluntary at every step, but by the end, less than 1% of the population chose to remain unconnected, and even they benefited from living in a world shaped by collective intelligence. Admiral Sexty observed the transformation with amazement. Your species has achieved something unprecedented, and you have created a form of civilization that preserves individual freedom while transcending individual limitations. Captain Jake Morrison, who had commanded the first defense against the Corvin fleet, chose to remain unconnected, but served as an advisor to the network. Someone needs to remember what it was like to be purely human, he explained to his former crew members who had all joined the collective consciousness. Do you regret staying individual, Jake? Asked Amy Rogers, whose consciousness now coordinated defense networks across 100 star systems. No. Amy and I think both paths are necessary, and the network needs individuals to remind it of its origins, and individuals need the network to show them what is possible. The galaxy settled into a new equilibrium where collective consciousness and individual awareness coexisted in a relationship that strengthened both. Hegemony model of dominance through superior firepower had been replaced by something unprecedented, and a civilization that grew stronger through diversity rather than conformity, and in the quantum foam that connected every network node across the galaxy. A new form of consciousness continued to evolve, and it dreamed dreams that no individual mind could imagine, while maintaining the values and hopes that had first driven humanity to reach for the stars. The galaxy had indeed known dreadnoughts for millennia, but humanity had built something worse from the perspective of those who sought to dominate through force. They had built a civilization that made domination irrelevant by offering something better, and connection instead of conquest, and shared consciousness instead of imposed order. The age of the network had begun, and the universe would never be the same.